back to another episode of Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Dr. Cinecropy is out today, so you've got me, Mandi Dickey, nurse practitioner, soloing it today. So guess what that means? If you listen regularly, it is a TBI takeover again today. So we have moved on to letters F and G. So again, if you recall, if you've been listening to this series at all, I've been covering all the topics that I can think of, at least, on the different letters in the alphabet for concussion and TBI related topics. Because there's so much that can be included in these, and I'm sure it's not an exhaustive list by any means. So feel free to leave some notes for the show if you want me to cover some different things in the future for different letters. But as we go through here, again, why I'm doing this is because there are so many people out there that have concussion and don't realize it. About 1 in 4 adults walking around the United States has had some sort of degree of concussion, which is also known as a mild TBI at some point in their lives. And it used to be the thought that people just got better and just time will tell. And most people would get better within a month is what they said. We now know that 30% of people go on to have long-term symptoms that last just kind of work forever for some of these people. And they have to learn to deal with it or learn to cope with it. So a lot of these topics that I cover would be things that would be considered symptoms or problems that people face with concussion and TBI. So again, if you have some of these symptoms and you don't know why, think back to when they started. Did you have any kind of accident, fall, slip, trip, where you didn't necessarily have to hit your head, but maybe you hit your torso hard enough to shake your head around, things like that. And maybe these are some of the explanations for why you have those symptoms. If you know you've had a concussion and you're experiencing some of these symptoms, this is why. So I'm trying to give an explanation for why they're there and how you can deal with them. So starting off, I'll get started with the first letter here in the F. And I put F and G today together because there aren't a lot of each of them to be one episode by themselves. So my first topic for F is fatigue. And this one I have kind of alluded to a little bit before. We talked about it in the last episode with energy with E. Fatigue is a very, very common symptom. We also discussed it when I talked about the letter A way back at the beginning of this series, activity intolerance. It is significant enough so that it deserves to be mentioned again, which is why I'm talking about it again here for F for fatigue. So what are the causes of it again? Again, as I've talked about before, but just kind of bringing it up again, damage to brain cells and the neural pathways when we have a concussion and altered brain chemistry, the changes in the neurotransmitters, those hormones in the brain that tell our body what to do. We have increased energy expenditure due to the brain trying to heal and compensate for the fact that we don't have all that energy. So what can this look like? The symptoms that people have: feeling tired or drained, having decreased physical and or mental stamina, difficulty concentrating, completing tasks, increased sensitivity to exertion. So if you have to exert yourself either physically or mentally, there's increased sensitivity to that, and sleep disturbances. All of those things can be signs of fatigue or causes, especially with that sleep disturbance part of it. So how do we manage it? Rest. Obviously, we need to rest. So we need good sleep at night. If you're not getting good sleep at night, naps are the key to that one. Light activity, because doing nothing is actually going to make it worse. So even just going for a few minutes of a walk several times a day, doing something to get yourself active, to get your body moving and try to stimulate that healing process to go. Sleep hygiene. So not having a TV in your bedroom or wherever you're sleeping. Don't have a TV in that area because that's really distracting. It upsets your sleep cycle. Don't be on screens right before you go to bed. That disrupts your blue light sensitivity and disrupts your sleep. Also, nutrition, hydration, stress management, pace your activities, plan time to schedule pleasurable activities, and so much more. I'll finish that list off. That's just a little teaser for you. But on the other side of the break, we'll come back and talk about this a little bit more, again, here on AM 950 Radio. again here on AM 950 Radio. This is Recharging the Human Battery. Dr. Sinacropi is out today, so you've got me, Mandi Dickey, covering the show, talking about TBI takeover today, ABCs of concussion. We're on letters F and G. Before the break, I was talking about fatigue and just started to kind of mention how to manage it. So we talked about management with rest, light activity, sleep hygiene. Nutrition is really important. I didn't talk about that one really much before the break, but nutrition is important. We need to make sure that we're getting enough protein, making sure that we're eating at regular intervals. Sometimes people with concussion will forget to eat or they don't have an appetite. So trying to get some of that food in can be interesting. And at the flip side, sometimes people have an increased appetite. So making sure that you're watching what you eat and remembering the fact that you have eaten so that you don't continue to eat again, so that you have good balanced nutrition. Hydration, again, we talk about this all the time on the show, making sure you drink plenty of water. Most of us don't, but half your body weight, take your pounds, divide it by 2. That's how many ounces of water you should drink in a day at baseline. And if you're doing any more activity or if you're trying to heal from something, you need a little bit extra even than that. Stress management is huge for those with recovering from concussion and TBI because stress will make those symptoms worse. It makes your sleep worse. It makes any of these symptoms that we talk about, it makes them worse if you are under a lot of stress, which happens after a concussion, especially if you have financial issues, which is our next letter F that's coming up in a moment. That can lead to a lot of stress, but managing that stress is going to be your number one thing with that. Pace your activities again, as I was mentioning before the break. Plan time to schedule pleasurable activities, things that you enjoy. It's going to be a balance of trying to get all of the things done that you have to get done with a little bit of energy that you have. So you need to enjoy some of the time that you have with that energy. So find time, if it's just sitting outside and watching the birds, or we had a turkey in our yard yesterday. That was really cool to watch because I've never seen one in town like that before. So taking time to just enjoy those little things in life, it's really, really important to help ground yourself. And that's really good advice for anybody, not just people that are experiencing TBI and concussion recovery. And acknowledge that you might not be able to do as much as you used to. Try not to focus on the things that you haven't achieved, but look at the things that you have. And I know those things are easier said than done, but again, they're really, really important. Other things that can help with that fatigue, cognitive rehab. There are some medications that might be useful for at least brief periods of time, including stimulants. Red light therapy, transcranial laser, obviously all the things that we do at Hypercharge, the EWAT, the exercise with oxygen therapy, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy as well. And there are a couple places around the metro area that do that as well. How long does it take to recover from this fatigue? That's one that I can't really answer very well. I don't have a crystal ball telling me what's going on in the future, and it varies widely. Some people can be fatigued for just a few weeks. Some, it can be years and long-lasting, kind of a permanent type of thing, depending on what's going on with them and what kind of treatment they've gotten. So a lot of variables go into that. So again, like with everything else with concussion, unfortunately, I can't tell you how long really it's going to last. And that's where people don't like me. But I wish I had a crystal ball for myself on that one. So moving on to the next F letter is finances. And this one is huge again. If you have to be off work for an extended period of time or lose your job due to injury, finances can be a major issue and lead to a lot of fatigue and stress and all the other things that tend to be a downward spiral. We talked about this in disability with D. Some people will qualify to use short-term disability, long-term disability, FMLA, or unemployment, but those are all at a decreased rate from your traditional job income, and that can affect the family's finances. So a good thing to do is take a good analysis of where you're spending your money and what needs to be done to maintain those finances. This might require the help of somebody else that has not had a brain injury so that you can evaluate where you're spending your money and see if you can make any changes anywhere. Personally, with my husband and I, we sat down and we cut out anything that we didn't need. If it was a want and not a need, it went bye-bye. So that Audible memberships, things like that, they're only $10, $15 a month, but those add up if you have several of those. So we cut out our audiobooks. We cut out music memberships. We did car washes less frequently, or we did them ourselves. We didn't go out to eat as much, although grocery bills are getting just as high sometimes these days. So that might not be as big of an issue for you. We didn't make sure we didn't waste food. Now, this is something that most people should do anyway, but we really tried to be cautious of what we were bringing in the home and making sure that we weren't wasting food at the end of the week. We started shopping at thrift stores and discounted clothing stores like TJ Maxx and Sierra as much as possible to pay reduced prices on clothing for the kids, because they still needed kids and it still needed clothes, but we didn't want to pay full price. And I'm not one that likes to pay full price anyway, but that's a really good way to try to save a little bit of money there. We extended time between haircuts as much as possible for myself and my husband, and I cut my boys' hairs so that we didn't have to take them in anywhere. So we did all these things to try to reduce the finances that we had to spend out, knowing that my income was not there for quite some time. Use assistance when you need. Don't be too proud to do that. There are food shelves around. The county assistance programs are there if you qualify for them. Other ideas, mortgage forbearance can be taken for up to 6 months, but you do need to be cautious that it still needs to get paid back when you pick back up on your payments, and you'll be considered delinquent until you pay those back. Nobody told me that until after I was in the program. Now, it was not something that we could handle at that time. I had to put it on a pause, but it was quite a shock when we got that huge bill at the end of those 6 months. If you have public student loans, you can put them on hold for up to 6 months also due to financial hardship, but they'll need to be picked up at that point. They don't pause the interest, but they pause the payments. So that gives you a little break on that one. Try not to just use credit cards. I know that's a really big temptation to just use them, but you'll have to be paying back those plus interest. So what you're going to be paying is more than what you would have paid in the meantime. You can pull money out of your retirement if absolutely needed, and that sometimes will be the case. But when you are doing that, if it gets to the point where you have to look at that, you need to be aware of a few things. Again, things that were never told to me before all of this. And I am not a financial advisor by any means, but just telling you the experiences that I had. If you pull from a retirement fund from your current employer, you can do it as a hardship, and you don't have to pay the penalties on it. If you pull it from a retirement fund from a previous employer, you will not qualify for a hardship because those no longer exist if you're not a current employee, and you'll have to pay penalties at tax time. But they do thankfully take out the taxes to the state and federal, so you don't have to worry about that part. It's just the penalties that you have to pay, but things that you have to be knowledgeable about. And finances affect our family, as I mentioned. So the next F letter is family. Families often experience many changes as the shifts in family dynamics occur after a person has experienced a brain injury, really of any kind. So stroke, TBI, any of those would be the same kind of things. But the spouse and or parents, if the kids that are injured and the person is elderly, it kind of depends on where you are in that. If it's the parents or the kids that are helping the person, may take on the role of the caregiver, and they often have to take on increased responsibilities in the home. And this leads to changes in employment, in household tasks, social activities that the other spouse, partner, parent, whatever, might have to take up another job to make up the cost of the person that wasn't able to work anymore. Those household tasks still need to get done by somebody, so you're going to have to redistribute them. In our house, we redistributed. My kids had to do more chores because I couldn't do a lot of stuff for a long time. And social activities tend to go on a pause because you're so busy trying to do all the things in your house that social activities are not a need as much at that point. They are, but they aren't, if that makes sense. The financial strain on the family can affect our relationships and cause financial stress on the family in general. Those relationships can change due to that caregiver role and due to stress from potential personality changes in the person that has the injury. It can lead to social isolation, not just for the injured person, but also for the spouse and caregiver, the immediate family, due to limited capacity to be in those busier environments. It can be very overstimulating, overwhelming to be in a busy situation. Even if it is a bunch of friends, it still gets very loud very quickly. I noted we had to leave events multiple times early because it was just too much and I couldn't be there as much as I wanted to be with friends and family. It just wasn't possible. So it did lead to some isolation. We missed some family gatherings at the holidays, especially in that first year, because it was too overstimulating. I come from a very large family, so trying to be in an enclosed space with all of those people was incredibly overwhelming. So my kids missed out on time with their cousins, their aunts and uncles, and their grandparents. So it wasn't just me that was affected, it was the whole family. There are a high number of marriages that end after brain injuries, unfortunately, with rates varying widely between whatever article you want to find online, anywhere between 15 and 78%. So that's a huge difference in those rates. I'm not sure how the different researchers found those different numbers, but very wide variety of marriages that are affected by brain injuries. The factors that were found to influence marital stability included pre-injury relationship length. So those that were together longer before the injury tended to stay together more often. The more severe the head injury, the higher likelihood of divorce. If there was a history of substance abuse, there was a higher likelihood of divorce as well. And again, with that time frame thing, the older individuals at the time of injury were more likely to stay together, possibly because of that just length of time together as well. That said, some of the other sources that I was finding did cite that marriages that last tend to be stronger than they were pre-injury because you go through so much. There's so much stress you have to deal with. You really have to be open and honest with each other during that recovery time. So the marriages that do last do tend to be stronger after that injury. How can we manage family issues? Respite care. So if the spouse or parent or child is now the caregiver of that loved one, taking some time for respite, getting some help with that so that you can have time for yourself, because that's really, really important. We talked about those caregiver needs back in letter C. So very, very important. Counseling for individuals and families is also very beneficial. I think I've mentioned on here before, my husband and I went through it after my injury, and it was amazing for our relationship, helped us to definitely be a stronger family unit after my injury. Open communication. And this is one that's important for everybody. I think we all could probably communicate a little bit better, but open communication about what you need as the individual, what the caregiver needs, making sure that everybody's needs are actually being met is really, really important. Caregivers need to prioritize their self-care so that they don't get burnout and so that they don't start to feel resentment of that loved one that they're taking care of. So lots of things that come into play there. A very similar and related topic is friendships, another F word. Good F words here, though, right? Friendships also struggle like families do because friends have a hard time adapting to the changes after someone's brain injury. They don't have to be there. They're not seeing it 24/7. They're the ones that come in for social events, or maybe you're texting or calling periodically, but they're not seeing the everyday burden that the person with the concussion and TBI has. So they do have a hard time adapting to that, especially if the injured person is not able to tolerate those gatherings of friends for a while and might need a quieter environment. If your group of friends tends to be louder, the group activities tend to be at clubs or bars, loud restaurants, that might be something that's off limits for that person with the brain injury. So there is a bit of social isolation and a little bit of distancing, and sometimes those friendships grow apart afterwards because of that, because you just can't spend the same amount of time with them. Conversations may look different. They might be less frequent. So those texts or calls might happen less often because the person can't tolerate all that talking, or they don't remember to call people or text people, or they might get text messages and forget to respond back. It's not that they don't want to, but that memory piece after a head injury is definitely a big factor in whether or not you remember to communicate with people. And with any critical time in your life, you need to kind of you tend to kind of find out who your real friends are, as they always say. When something big happens in your life, you tend to find out those people that are going to be with you through it and those that aren't. And sometimes friendships do end as the romantic relationships did, as I mentioned just a minute ago, after that brain injury. So if you are friends with someone who's had a brain injury, some tips for you if you are that person, the friend of the brain injured person. Remember to check in with them. And if they're not, especially if they're not reaching out to you, please remember to check in with them, because again, it's not because they don't want to communicate with you. It's that they either can't or they don't remember. Offer specific assistance rather than saying, reach out if you need help, because the person may either not want to be a burden or they might not know what they need help with. I had one day that my adult son offered to come and help me clean up different areas of my house because I wasn't able to keep up with everything. And I couldn't ask him specifically what I wanted, but he said, I'm going to come. This is the day that I can come. Is it okay if I can be there? And that was probably the most helpful thing that anybody's ever done for me, is just say, I'm going to be there on this day, and then we'll do whatever. And he did everything. I just kind of supervised because I did not have the energy to do all the things that he was doing. But we got through so many things in my house that there's no way I would have been able to do it on my own. That was, again, probably the most helpful thing that anyone has ever done in my recovery process, because I couldn't ask for that help myself. I didn't know how to ask for it. I tend to be a very proud person. I don't like to ask for help. So that was another part of it as well. And so having somebody just offer that, if you are the friend or the family member, that's a great thing to do for that person that's injured, because they're not going to be able to ask for exactly what they need. And then last part for those friends of the injured person, have patience with your injured friend and don't give up on them. This is the time that they need you the most. So again, if you are those friends, just remember those little tips. The next F letter is frustration. And that one, I think you've probably gotten hints to all the different things that I've talked about throughout these ABCs, but frustration comes easily. You get easily frustrated with your family, with your children, your spouse, your pets. We talked about this a little bit with anger in the letter A. You get easily upset by things that you can't do that you used to be able to do. You get frustrated about finances, as we just talked about. You get frustrated with people who don't understand, including family and friends. You get frustrated when you don't understand something that you should understand, or at least something that you would have understood previously. Because again, that whole concentration piece, the understanding, really realizing what's going on around you gets affected. So just understanding written words, spoken words, all the things that you need to do on a daily basis. When you don't understand and you can't process what's going on, that leads to a lot of frustration. Frustration leads to depression. We talked about depression with the D letter again. It is easier said than done, but you need to give yourself some grace on this. And I had so many people telling me this all along in my recovery as well, that I needed to give myself grace. Think about how much patience you would give to somebody around you. And that's the amount of patience you should give yourself. Unless you're one of those people that has no patience, then you need to learn to grow that. If you're caring for somebody, you need to realize that they're getting just as frustrated with themselves as you get with them at sometimes as well. So how do you manage that one? Again, there's going to be a lot of thinking, a lot of processing on both sides, and a lot of patience, a lot of comforting. This is where, again, counseling can be helpful to try to deal with some of those frustrations, talk through them, analyze, are the things you're getting frustrated with something that you can manage, something that you don't have any control over, and what you can do with those. And again, communication is going to be key on this one. Fear is my next F letter. Fear can be for many reasons. If someone is severely injured and hospitalized, especially if they're on a ventilator with tubes coming out of everywhere, the family is the one that's going to be fearful at first, because they're fearful about their injured loved one's recovery, the unknown. It's not so much on the individual that's injured at this point, because they don't even know what happened yet. So fear starts off probably with the family members, with the caregivers, because they don't know what's going to happen. In the recovery phase, fear develops in the individual due to, again, the unknown. Will I recover? When will I recover? What if I don't recover? All the what ifs, all the whens, all the unknown information of what's going on in the future. There's a fear of long-term consequences. Again, I mentioned 30% of people will continue to have symptoms that are ongoing. So it's the fear of, am I going to be part of that 30%? Fear of changes in your life, changes in your plans, your family, your job. You can have all the best laid plans, and then you get in an accident and you have a brain injury, and life is changed in an instant. And that causes stress, and stress causes fear, and vice versa. And they go back and forth. Fear can also be PTSD related. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I think everybody is pretty much aware of that, but car accidents, sporting events, anything that can cause those concussions can cause PTSD as well. You can become scared of having that same event happening again. There are multiple stories of athletes that have become frozen due to the fear of repeating that same event and getting hurt again. And it can paralyze them emotionally and prevent them from actually returning to their sport at the same level of competition that they were prior to their injury, even if they have no lasting effects from their brain injury. It's just from that PTSD part of it. So that'll be really important. We'll talk about that way down in the letter P. But yeah, definitely something to be concerned about there. Fear can also be caused by neurotransmitter imbalances, those hormones in the brain that tell our brain and our body what to do. The brain creates fear about nothing when these hormones are interrupted. You start to ruminate and overthink things. You think the worst. You always feel like something bad is going to happen. And that can affect relationships because you're constantly thinking that there's something bad coming around the corner, and you ruminate. Ruminating means you just sit there and you roll over the same information over and over and over again, and it doesn't get you anywhere. All it does is increase your anxiety. So how do you manage fear? This one's a really, really tough one to deal with. But again, support groups are going to be really helpful. Professional help. This is where counseling, therapy that's their bread and butter, is kind of dealing with this kind of stuff. PTSD and fear, anxiety. Sometimes anti-anxiety medications can be helpful. Again, even in the short term, just to kind of help you get through that period of time when you need to learn to deal with it. But until you can learn to deal with it, they help to manage some of those hormones. Relaxation, meditation, journaling. Journaling is really important because you can look back on it and see how you felt and how you managed and how you got through some of those things. So don't discount journaling. I've learned a really good benefit about that recently as well. I've journaled periodically throughout my lifetime and never really thought much of it. But when you go back, you can see how long symptoms have been present or how long symptoms have been gone if you're in the recovery phase. You can see when you started to feel better if you're taking notes on all of those things. Again, it's easier said than done to kind of relax and meditate, but those things do over time work. It's not something you can meditate once for 5 minutes and say you're done and you tried it and it didn't work. A habit is built in 21 days and it is unbuilt in at least 21 days as well. So you can't try meditation or journaling or relaxation once and say it's not for you. You really got to give it a try for a good month before you know. And if you are that person that's had your memory affected from a concussion, you might want to write it down. Otherwise, you're not going to remember how many times you've done it. So there's that. My last F letter is foreign accent syndrome. And this is a fun one that I actually learned about last month when I went to the National TBI conference because I met somebody who had it. And I didn't realize that it was something that could happen after a concussion. I knew it was possible after a stroke, but those two things are actually very similar. They're both brain injuries, one's acquired and one actually, they're both acquired. So both acquired brain injuries, and both can have similar effects on the brain. So foreign accent syndrome is a sudden foreign accent without learning a new language. So you don't learn a new language. You don't speak different words. You just speak the same words with a different accent. It can happen after any kind of traumatic or acquired brain injury, as I just mentioned with strokes as well. It is often linked to the speech areas in the brain, particularly Broca's area. Broca's area tends to be in the front left part of the brain. For most people, our language is on the left side of our brain. Broca's area is in the frontal lobe. That lets us get our words out. That's the area that's responsible for rhythm and melody of speech and changes in pronunciation. So again, your native language remains the same. You don't learn new words, but the way you speak, it changes. So it comes off as this different foreign accent. I met a gal one time after her stroke. She had a Danish accent. And the person that I met, he was able to take on the accent of anybody he was introduced to. It was kind of cool. So management of this speech therapy can sometimes help. Sometimes it resolves on its own. Sometimes you just get this keepsake of a new accent without having to go anywhere. Moving on then to our G letters, and I have a couple of those to go through before we end our time here today. So the first G letter is grief. And grief is a funny thing because it looks different for everyone, but it is a very real response after a brain injury. Kubler-Ross is a well-known philosophy technique of the stages of grief. So you can find it in any psychology textbook. These stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Denial is the difficulty accepting the reality of the journey and its impact on you. Anger is the frustration and resentment towards the situation and yourself. Bargaining is trying to find ways to undo the injury and regain what was lost. Depression, obviously, is sadness, hopelessness, sense of loss, and the acceptance is coming to terms with the new reality and finding ways to live a fulfilling life. So grief happens because you lose that sense of who you were. You lose that part of your identity. You have changes in your life, your independence, your relationships, finances, changes in your abilities. It impacts your life plans. As I mentioned, I had just switched jobs a month before my accident, and had been in neurology for many, many years, was trying my hand in spine surgery with neurosurgery and was loving it. And I got to see a brain surgery the day of my accident. And I went from my highest high to my lowest low a few hours later, being in the emergency room with a C-collar on my neck and ice packs everywhere and not remembering what was happening. And suddenly 2 years have gone by and I'm still in that recovery phase. So life is not what I thought it was going to be 2 years ago. So things change, plans change, independence changes, relationships change, finances change. All of these things change because of a sudden injury that took away some of your life there. So grief is a real thing. It's often confused with post-concussive syndrome or PTSD. It's often overlooked, but it's a very emotionally painful thing. And it's important to acknowledge grief and address grief for that individual and for their loved ones. Because as you're grieving, you tend to spiral downward. It gets to be a very dark hole that you get into, and it's very full of depression and anxiety because you are not the same person that you were before, because you can't do things the same as you were before. And that might include finances, kind of losing that sense of self because you can't support your family like you used to. And it's really easy to get into a negative spiral with that so that you have difficulty getting back out of it. And it's hard, but it's very important to acknowledge that and to realize that you can't always get yourself out of that hole. You need some help with that. So that's where, again, therapy comes into play. Really good relationships with your family and your friends. It's important to make sure that you keep at least some of those so that you have that support as you're going through this. I thankfully had a lot of really good support around me to help me through all of these phases of grief that I had as I lost my sense of self and wasn't sure if I was able to ever get back to being a nurse practitioner. But here I am a month back into being a nurse practitioner again, finally, very part-time, but I'm there. And it's my first day when I saw my first patient, I was literally dancing in the hallway because as I said to my colleagues, it felt good to feel real again because I didn't feel real. I didn't feel whole for a very long time. So it's a very, very, very real, very raw emotions to go through. How do you manage that grief? Again, as I mentioned, having a lot of support around you, support groups can be very helpful. Self-care, taking that time to take care of yourself, doing those things like relaxation, calming techniques are really, really important to help keep you grounded in what's going on. Because again, it's easy to kind of spiral and start thinking about all the what ifs again. Seek professional help. Therapy is cannot estimate or explain how important really that is. It's really, 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 really helpful. One of my therapists was what helped me get through kind of the PTSD and get into the acceptance part of it. I think I mentioned it on the show that when we talked about acceptance back in A. So as she was talking about it, pain, whether it is physical or emotional, plus non-acceptance equals suffering. So not accepting where you are. Pain, that same pain, whether it's physical or emotional, plus acceptance, accepting where you are. You don't have to like it, but accepting it. Pain plus acceptance equals pain. You just have the pain. The suffering part is optional. And I think as I talked about back then, it reminded me of the path to the dark side. So my new goal was to not make it to the dark side on that one. So again, very grateful for the support that I had around me at that time. Acknowledge conflicting feelings. Learn to let go of them and learn to move on. Again, easier said than done, but you have to look for the positives in whatever situation that you have. If I had not gotten into my car accident, if I had not gotten a TBI myself, I wouldn't have learned all the things that I have to be able to bring them to you guys, to educate you, to educate my patients, to educate my colleagues, so that we can improve care for patients that are experiencing concussion and TBI. So there are definitely positive things that came out of my accident. Whether or not I saw it at the beginning was a whole nother story. Be patient, focus on those strengths, focus on the fact that you can do things. And as you're able to do things, celebrate those little wins, because sometimes they come too far and few between, but when they do come, you need to celebrate them. And give yourself time and permission to grieve. You cannot skip this step. It's not just a go skip the go and collect your $200. It's not that game. We're not doing that. You can't just snap out of it. You can't just get over it. You have to go through it. There's a song, if you're going through hell, keep on going, because you have to. You can't just sit there and wallow in it. And grief can happen to the person that's injured. It can happen to the family as well. So acknowledge it, support it, work through it. And the key part there is through. The next G topic is gender differences. I did an entire episode of this on my podcast, Brain Wellness, the podcast. So if you want to hear an entire episode just about the gender differences, episode 67 on my podcast, Brain Wellness, the podcast, you will get all of that there. But I just wanted to refer back to a few highlights here for you, to just kind of give you a little teaser to think about going back and listening to that episode. Females tend to have more cognitive impacts afterwards. So there is a difference between biological males and females in regards to healing from concussion. As I mentioned, females tend to have more cognitive impacts. They tend to have longer recovery time for that initial concussion, and longer recovery time for subsequent concussions, regardless of how many or how little it was. It tends to take less impact to cause more symptoms the next time around. And concussions may actually happen more often in females than in males, though the research has always shown the opposite. But again, because of the biological changes, biological females tend to have less muscle mass on their neck to support the head. So injuries can happen a lot more commonly. And it's very much underreported in the research, and very much under-researched. So if you're trying to find any kind of details on females, it's only really been in the last few years that any research has been done to really look at those gender differences, but there's so much still to be done. I have learned more recently that after a concussion, females can have changes in their hormones that affects all of your hormones, actually. So that'll be in my H episode later on down in the future here. But it can put women into early menopause even. So a lot of those hormones are changed, and we just aren't doing the research on it. So there's so much more yet to come about gender differences. And again, if you want to hear all of the fascinating things that I found, episode 67 of my podcast, Brain Wellness, the podcast, will get you all of the details that you might want to know on that, and some surprising things in there as well. The last topic that I have, I'll start on it before we get to the break and then come back and finish it afterwards. But this last topic is guilt. And this is a big one, and kind of why I wanted to take a little bit more time on this one, because it can happen again to the injured person or to somebody else. So if you're feeling this, I'll kind of give you a little bit of an explanation of why. When we were going through, again, also on my podcast, I had my husband come on and talk about it, and we talked about relationships, and that kind of gets back to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today as well. But my husband admitted that he felt a lot of guilt because I was injured so badly in our accident. He was the driver, I was the passenger, and he felt like it should have been him that was injured since he was the driver. And he really felt guilt for a long time. That kind of put a wedge between us for a little bit, because he became angry because of his guilt, and he didn't want to admit it. He thought I resented him, but I at the same time thought he resented me a little bit because I had so many symptoms and I couldn't get back to work. But there were so many feelings around that. And there are feelings that weren't wanted, but they just are a normal part of the healing process and need to be worked through. So guilt is a normal thing that happens. Again, it happens to you, both the injured person and the people around them. So give yourself some grace on that. We'll talk about it more on the other side of the break and what that looks like, why it happens, and kind of how to deal with it. Again, on the other side of the break on Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Welcome back one last time today on Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. Again, Dr. Synecropy is out. You've been listening to me, Mandi Dickey, all day long today. Nurse practitioner extraordinaire, as he always likes to say. So concussion is my thing. Brain injury is definitely my wheelhouse. So when I get the chance to talk about it, I always love to take that chance. So today we've been talking about letters F and G in the ABCs of concussion in my TBI takeover time here today. So we've talked about lots of different topics. Before the break, I was talking about guilt and talked a little bit about how my husband admitted that he was feeling guilty that I was injured and he wasn't injured quite as badly in the accident. Turns out he did have a little bit of a concussion as we've been going on these last couple of years. He is experiencing some similar symptoms to me, just not anywhere to the degree that I had them. So again, he still feels guilty about that part. But there's guilt on the part of the individual that's injured as well. And that guilt can come from loss of abilities, feeling guilty that you can't do the things that you did before, especially if those were things that brought in money for the family. Guilty that you cannot keep up with housework or kids' activities because of your symptoms. Because again, it just gets overwhelming to try to do all the things all the time. I always talk about how before my accident, I worked a full-time job and I had a part-time job and I had my podcast and I was training for a marathon and I had all the kids' activities and I was doing all the things. And I haven't been able to do any of those things to the same degree that I did before my accident. So there's been a lot of guilt that I can't keep up with all of those things. Guilt and shame can be symptoms of depression, which also happens at higher rates in brain injuries. We talked about in letter D again too. You can be guilty because of how your brain injury has impacted your loved ones, because it's not, even though our disabilities are invisible, what we do to other people is not invisible. So I can see how my brain injury has affected my family. I can see it very clearly. And that does make me feel guilty that I haven't been able to get better faster. But trying to force myself just made it go slower. So that was fun. And then there's something called survivor's guilt. And we talk more about survivor's guilt when people are in an accident and somebody passed away in the accident and other people lived. But you can also feel survivor's guilt just because of how you survived and how you recovered. You can feel that when you meet other people who have had brain injuries as well, and you kind of feel a little bit bad about how their recovery has gone. Again, when I went out to that brain injury conference in DC last month, I met a lot of people who had been injured for many, many years, and some of them had not had the same opportunities that I had. I had hypercharge here, and that I literally drew out pictures that I put in my book about feeling like my brain was being jump-started, because that absolutely jump-started my healing process. Going to hypercharge, doing the laser, the red light therapy, all the things at hypercharge that we do there. And other people didn't have those experiences, and other people had not gotten better like I had. And the other treatments that I got in the neurofeedback, the neurological chiropractor, all of these other things, I had opportunities that other people didn't. So as I'm getting back to work, even just the part-time work, as I'm getting back to the thing that I enjoy doing, the thing that gives me passion, and as I'm able to do these shows and do my podcast and do all these other things, I felt a huge amount of guilt when I met these other people who had had injuries for a decade or more, and they still weren't back to what they were doing, and they were living on disability and not what they were doing before, having a lot of anxiety and depression because they couldn't do the things that they were before. So that survivor's guilt is real when you feel like you've been healing better than other people and you wish that same thing for them. So how do you manage that kind of guilt? Again, support groups, professional help, counseling is really important. Counseling, communication, talking to others, self-care, self-compassion, focusing on your strengths, engaging in activities that bring you joy. Some of those things that kind of turn that look into a positive outlook. Cherishing beautiful things in life. As I mentioned, that turkey that was in my yard yesterday. That was so much fun to watch that. Don't hide yourself. And for family members, be aware of those emotional challenges that can arise with the brain injury. Be patient with your loved one, support them, get support for yourself. As we talk about every week on here, take care of yourself, take care of your family. Thanks for listening.